The night was thick with the West Texas heat, the kind that made the land seem endless and the air stand still. It was August 8th, 2013. The highway that cut through the desolate stretch between San Angelo and Bronte, Texas, was nearly silent. Only the occasional 18-wheeler pierced the darkness with its high beams and diesel growl. But around 12:50 a.m., a 911 call broke that stillness, one so frantic and confusing it would come to haunt everyone who heard it. Brandon Lawson was 26 years old, a father of 4, an oil field worker, known for being responsible, tough, and deeply protective of his family. But that night, something cracked. Brandon had left his San Angelo home in a rush. He'd gotten into a heated argument with his longtime girlfriend, Lawson. They'd been together for nearly a decade. She said he seemed anxious, maybe paranoid. He told her he was going to his father's house in Crowley, about 3 hours away, but he never got there. Just after 11:30 p.m., Brandon stormed out of their house and jumped into his silver Ford F-150. He didn't take his phone charger. He didn't bring a change of clothes, just grabbed his keys, his wallet, and left into the night. What happened over the next hour would spiral into one of the most bizarre missing person cases Texas has ever seen. Ledessa, worried about his state of mind, tried calling him around midnight. No answer. Then he called his brother Kyle and said something strange, that he was almost out of gas, and that 3 Mexicans were chasing him out of town. Kyle was confused. Brandon didn't usually talk like that. Was he high? Was he hallucinating? He had just passed a drug test earlier that week for work, but he did have a past with substances. At 12:30 a.m., Brandon called 911. He was frantic, his voice rushed and hard to understand. The call was routed through a local dispatcher in Coke County. Parts of the transcript still don't make sense. Yes, I'm in the middle of a field. My truck ran out of gas. There's one car here, guys chasing me through the woods. Please hurry. When the dispatcher asked him to repeat himself, the line cut in and out. He sounded out of breath, scared. Then he uttered a chilling phrase. I need the cops. Then silence. At 12:50 a.m., Kyle and his girlfriend, Audrey, were already on their way to bring Brandon gas. Kyle had talked to his brother on the phone just minutes before and said Brandon sounded like he was running, panicked. He told Kyle that someone was after him, that he was bleeding. But when Kyle pressed for details, Brandon only repeated, "Just get here, please." They arrived near Brandon's truck off U.S. Route 277 at around 1:10 a.m. The truck was parked awkwardly, partially blocking a lane near a remote rest stop. The gas can was ready, but Brandon wasn't there. They waited. A sheriff's deputy also arrived around the same time, responding to the 911 call. Neither Kyle nor the officer saw any sign of Brandon. No blood, no footprints leading into the brush. Kyle assumed Brandon was hiding, maybe scared of getting arrested. He had a warrant out for a minor probation violation and might have panicked. Kyle called out into the night. "Bran, come out, man." No answer. Kyle stayed for nearly 30 minutes. No movement, no sound. He eventually left the gas can in the bed of Brandon's truck and drove off, figuring his brother would come back once the coast was clear. But Brandon Lawson never emerged from the darkness again. The next morning, the truck was still there. Doors locked, wallet inside. No signs of struggle, no blood. The only footprints found led in multiple directions, some into the brush, some circling the vehicle, as if he was trying to decide where to run. The sun rose hot over Coke County, baking the dust and parching the land. But Brandon had vanished into thin air. The area around Route 277 is desolate. Miles of scrubland, cactus, dry riverbeds, and barbed wire fencing. Rattlesnakes, and coyotes. It wasn't the kind of place you could survive long without water or shelter. But the question wasn't just where Brandon went. It was why. Why had he panicked? Why did he say he was being chased? Who were the guys in the woods? Some believed he was hallucinating. Others thought maybe he'd stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to see, like a drug deal in the middle of nowhere. There were rumors that area was used for illicit activity, but nothing was confirmed. The 911 call was released months later. When it was, people combed through it line by line, trying to decode his words. Some believed they heard a second voice whispering in the background. Others thought they heard gunshots faintly in the distance. The audio was grainy, distorted, perfect for fueling conspiracy. Kyle insisted his brother wasn't suicidal. He said Brandon loved his kids too much. He believed his brother had run into someone dangerous, someone who didn't want him to be found. Over the next few days, search parties scoured the area with helicopters, cadaver dogs, drones. Nothing. No remains, no clothing, no blood trail. Brandon had disappeared without a trace, less than 20 minutes after making a 911 call for help. Weeks turned into months. Theories multiplied. Some said Brandon faked his death, that he had escaped into Mexico to avoid arrest. But why leave behind his kids? Why call for help if it was all a setup? Others said it was police, that maybe something happened during that short window between the call and when Kyle arrived. But dispatch logs showed the deputy arrived after Kyle, and Kyle swore the cop never even got out of the vehicle. Still others believed the call was real, that Brandon was chased, maybe even killed that night. But if so, by who? And why was there no evidence? Then came the most chilling detail. According to phone records, Brandon had called 911 at 12:30 a.m. But he'd also made 4 more calls after that, to his brother, to Ledessa, and to a friend. Each call was only seconds long. Most went straight to voicemail. His phone finally went dead at 1:19 a.m., which meant Brandon was alive and moving for nearly an hour after he called for help. But no one ever saw him again. What could have happened in those 49 minutes? What nightmare unfolded in that dry, silent brushland off US 277? The mystery of Brandon Lawson had just begun. The West Texas morning was already unforgiving when the search began. By 8 a.m. on August 9th, 2013, the brutal sun had turned the night's mystery into a burning desert riddle. There were no shadows left to hide in, no trace of Brandon Lawson in the dust. Only his Ford F-150 stood as silent witness, parked awkwardly, almost like it had been abandoned in a hurry. The truck still held his wallet. The gas can Kyle had left sat untouched. Brandon, however, was nowhere to be found. Deputies walked the perimeter. They scanned the dry brush, cactus patches, and tree stumps with trained eyes. But the search was hindered from the start. The land around Highway 277 near Bronte is hostile terrain. Rolling pastures tangled in mesquite, with barbed wire fencing crisscrossing every few hundred yards. Even experienced searchers knew this. If a man had been injured or disoriented, he wouldn't last long out there. But what unsettled them more was what wasn't found. No shoes, no scraps of clothing, no blood, no drag marks, no signs of a struggle. Brandon's scent had evaporated from the land as if the earth had swallowed him whole. In the hours after the initial search, conflicting timelines and half-answers began to muddy the picture. Kyle, Brandon's younger brother, went over his last phone conversation again and again. Brandon had told him over the phone, "I'm bleeding." But he never said why. Was it a wound, a fight, a fall, a hallucination? Kyle admitted he was torn. He wanted to believe his brother had just gotten scared and fled the area to avoid getting arrested. Brandon did have an active warrant for missing a court date related to an old drug charge. But this wasn't normal behavior. Brandon wasn't the type to disappear on his kids. He was a working man, a provider. Whatever made him bolt that night, it wasn't fear of a minor warrant. Then there was the haunting 911 call. When authorities finally released the full audio weeks later, it left the internet stunned. The call was grainy, nearly unintelligible at points. But one thing was clear: Brandon was desperate. He was running, and he thought someone was after him. "I'm in the middle of a field," he said. "My truck ran out of gas. There's one car here. The guy's chasing me. Through the woods. Please hurry." At one point his voice dropped, garbled by static. "They got the first guy." The dispatcher asked, "Do you need an ambulance?" "No," Brandon said. "I need the cops." The words came out slurred. Some thought he sounded high. Others thought he was terrified. Then came the chilling silence. The line stayed open, and for a brief moment, a whisper, faint and possibly male, seemed to slip into the background. It was indecipherable. But once people online heard it, it was burned into their minds. Was someone with him during the call? Was he running from someone? Someone real? Ledessa, his girlfriend, didn't believe the drug theories. She admitted Brandon had struggled with meth in the past, but he had passed a recent drug test. They had fought earlier that night, yes, but it wasn't out of the ordinary for them. What had set this night apart? According to Ledessa, Brandon had seemed paranoid before leaving. He thought people were after him, but she assumed it was just stress, or maybe exhaustion. He hadn't slept much due to long shifts in the oil fields, but she never imagined he'd vanish into thin air. By the end of the day, there was already talk that the case wouldn't be easy. The Coke County Sheriff's Office had only a handful of deputies, and search resources were limited. Texas Rangers eventually got involved, but without evidence of foul play or even a clear direction, there was little to build on. In the days that followed, volunteers showed up to help. Locals on horseback, drone operators, cadaver dogs. They combed a 5-mile radius around where the truck was found. Nothing. No clothing snagged on barbed wire. No drag marks in the dirt. No bloodstains in the underbrush. It was like he had simply walked into the darkness and never came out. But the more people looked, the more theories began to bloom, some rooted in fact, others tangled in speculation. Theory #1, drug-induced delusion. This was the law enforcement angle. Brandon, they said, might have relapsed. Perhaps he had taken meth or some stimulant, experienced a psychotic break, and imagined people chasing him. The area he ran into was dense and unforgiving. He could have gotten lost, succumbed to the heat or terrain. His remains, then, might simply be buried under brush or scavenged by animals. But this theory had gaps. If it had been a drug-induced episode, why no signs of a fall or panic? No clothing left behind. No scent for the dogs to follow. And why would Brandon, mid-delusion, still think to call 911? He seemed lucid. Scared, but lucid. And he didn't sound like someone hallucinating. He sounded like someone being hunted. Theory #2, foul play. This theory haunted everyone closest to Brandon. What if he had seen something he wasn't supposed to see? The area was known to locals as being lightly trafficked, sometimes used for illicit activity. Had he stumbled across a deal gone wrong? A trafficking operation? Was someone watching the road that night? The call said it clearly. "There's one car here. Guy's chasing me." But there were no tire tracks, no reports of other vehicles that night, and no witnesses. Still, people wondered if Brandon had run from his truck and been intercepted in the woods, killed and disposed of in some remote stretch of land. But if so, where was the evidence? Theory hash 3. Law enforcement involvement. A more controversial idea emerged in online forums and YouTube crime channels. That maybe law enforcement had something to hide. Maybe Brandon had encountered the wrong person, someone with a badge, and the case was being quietly buried. But there was no evidence of that either. Phone records showed that the sheriff's deputy arrived after Kyle, not before. And Kyle was adamant. The officer didn't even get out of the car that night. Still, mistrust lingered, especially because the 911 call took years to be publicly released. Why delay such a crucial evidence? Theory hash 4. Voluntary disappearance. Some floated the theory that Brandon faked his own death. Maybe he had debts. Maybe the warrant spooked him. Maybe he wanted to vanish. But why call 911 in a panic? Why beg his brother to help? Why say he was bleeding? It didn't add up. And if he had wanted to disappear, why leave his truck behind with his wallet and everything inside? No. Something else had happened. Something real. Something terrifying. By week 3, public interest had started to wane. The sheriff's office was tight-lipped. No press conferences, no public updates, just a missing man and a grieving family with more questions than answers. Then came a strange twist. A truck driver came forward. He claimed that just after 12:45 a.m., the night Brandon vanished, he had passed a man walking alongside Route 277, disoriented, waving his arms. The driver didn't stop. But later, when he saw the news, he thought the man might have been Brandon. It was a slender lead. The area the driver described was about a half-mile from where Brandon's truck was found. If true, it meant Brandon had survived well after the 911 call. But why walk away from the truck? Why not flag down help? And why say, "I need the cops," if he had something to hide? The questions mounted. Every possible angle collapsed under scrutiny. And then everything went silent. Weeks became months. Seasons changed. The dust blew over the trails. Brandon Lawson became another statistic in the missing persons database. But he didn't feel like just another case. The raw panic in his voice, the urgency, the eerie, chopped-up 911 call, they lingered. For Ledessa, for Kyle, and for Brandon's children, the silence was unbearable. They kept hoping, searching, reaching out to media, begging anyone to come forward. Then a year later, Kyle got a call that chilled him. A man claiming to have information about Brandon's final moments contacted him through a third party. He wouldn't reveal his name, wouldn't meet in person. But he said this: Brandon didn't run. Brandon didn't hide. He was taken. Then he hung up. The number was untraceable. Burner phone. No callback. But it reopened old wounds. Was it a cruel prank? Or a whisper from the dark? Someone who knew? As time passed, the case grew cold. Leads dried up. The terrain around Highway 200 and 77 grew over with weeds and silence. But Kyle never stopped searching. Every month he returned to the area, sometimes alone, sometimes with the search teams. Always hoping, always haunted. Years went by. 3, 4. Time crawled forward while the mystery of Brandon Lawson remained suspended in darkness, like a cruel echo that refused to fade. He had vanished in 2013, left behind a half-filled gas can, a locked truck, a string of dropped calls, and a final message that had become an obsession for amateur sleuths and grieving family alike. I need the cops. But no cops came in time. And no one, not even those closest to Brandon, could answer the only question that truly mattered. Where did he go? In the aftermath of his disappearance, the Lawson family became divided. Rumors trickled through Bronte and San Angelo. Some accused Ledessa of withholding information. Others blamed Kyle for not doing more that night. Fingers were pointed, words exchanged. But grief was the common thread binding them all. And in grief, obsession was born. Kyle Lawson, haunted by the last phone call with his brother, couldn't stop replaying it in his head. I'm bleeding. I need the cops. They're after me. He heard it in his sleep. He heard it in the wind as he returned month after month to that same stretch of Highway 277, walking the brittle land with nothing but a GPS tracker, a drone, and a plastic bag full of hope. Each visit ended the same way. Silence. No trace, no answers, no peace. By 2018, nearly 5 years had passed. Brandon's face was still on missing persons posters, and true crime podcasts had revived interest in the case. Crawlspace, Unfound, and The Vanished dedicated episodes to dissecting the 911 call and exploring the theories, but even with thousands of ears listening and dozens of online communities sharing their interpretations, Brandon was still a ghost. Then a strange shift occurred. A volunteer search group using high-resolution drone footage and satellite overlays identified a new area that hadn't been properly searched, about 3/4 of a mile southeast from where Brandon's truck had been found. The terrain was nearly impassable, a barbed wire cattle fence, followed by a deep brush-covered ravine and patches of thorny mesquite so thick they could rip clothing to ribbons. It wasn't somewhere anyone would go willingly, but if Brandon had been injured or trying to hide, he might have crawled through. The search team made plans, a weekend operation. Dozens of volunteers, cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar. Kyle was hesitant at first. He had been down this road before, filled with leads that led nowhere. But something about this spot felt different, and it was too close, too obvious. Why hadn't anyone thought of it before? Then came the weather. A late August thunderstorm swept through West Texas, flooding parts of Coke County and washing out trails. The search was delayed by weeks. When they finally returned in September, conditions were different. The earth was softer. Something that had been buried beneath the brush before now stood partially exposed. A boot. Worn, faded. Half covered in mud and thorns, not a fresh drop. Not recent. The searchers froze. Just 20 feet away, a tattered piece of denim. Then a bone. The sheriff's office was contacted immediately. Within hours, crime scene tape cut across the ravine. Forensic anthropologists from the Texas Rangers arrived within a day. Excavation began. The remains were partial, scattered by weather, by time, and possibly by animals, but unmistakably human. The area was sealed off for days. The Lawson family was notified. No names were publicly confirmed at first. The sheriff refused to speculate. But Kyle knew. He knew before the DNA results came back. It was him, Brandon. The confirmation came a few weeks later. A femur, a jawbone, matched through dental records and DNA. Brandon Lawson had been found. But the answers didn't come with the discovery. In fact, the mystery only deepened. The remains, authorities said, showed no obvious signs of trauma, no bullet wounds, no fractures, no blunt force. The cause of death was officially listed as undetermined. That was it. After 9 years, after countless theories, Brandon was found, and nobody could say how he died. The boots matched the ones he had worn that night. His jeans, still tangled in roots, had pockets emptied. His phone was never recovered. His shirt, weathered to near transparency, had a strange tear near the shoulder, though officials said it may have been caused by animals or environment. But Kyle disagreed. He pointed to something no one had explained. There were 3 fences between Brandon's truck and where his remains were discovered. Barbed wire. And based on where the body was found, Brandon would have had to scale those fences while injured in the dark and with no flashlight or shoes. The brush was thick, the terrain uneven. Coyotes roamed that area at night. Why would he go that direction? Why not walk back toward the road? Toward help? Why crawl further into the darkness? Some said panic, disorientation. Others whispered murder. One theory stood out above the rest, a combination of them all. That Brandon had encountered someone that night, maybe multiple people. Maybe he had witnessed something near the rest stop or truck pull-off. Maybe he ran, got injured, hid in the brush. And maybe, just maybe, someone followed him into that ravine and made sure he never came out. Then left him there. No gunshot nodded, no blunt trauma, just abandonment. Let the heat, the exhaustion, and the silence do the rest. It's a theory that has gained traction, especially online. On Reddit, YouTube, and true crime forums, users have dissected aerial maps, cross-referenced call logs, and analyzed every syllable of the 911 audio. Many believe there are at least 2 other people audible in the call, unintelligible, yes, but present. Others think the dispatcher didn't take the call seriously enough, that too much time passed, that the moment to save Brandon passed in those first 10 minutes. But hindsight doesn't bring closure. It only sharpens regret. Ledessa kept her distance from the public after the remains were identified. In interviews prior to the discovery, she maintained that Brandon loved his children and would never have left them by choice. She believed something terrible had happened that night, something orchestrated. Kyle remained vocal. He pushed for further investigation. He wanted more than undetermined. He wanted truth. But truth doesn't come easily in the desert. It disappears in the dust, hides in the silence, and waits. Still, Brandon's voice lingers. That broken, garbled 911 call, forever looping in the minds of those who heard it. Please hurry. I need the cops. They got the first guy. Even now, no one knows what that meant. Who was the first guy? What happened to him? Was it real or the product of fear? The phone call dropped at 12:54 a.m. By 1:10 a.m., Kyle was on the scene. 16 minutes. That window is where the answers live and where the nightmare took place. Timeline breakdown. The final 49 minutes, 12:30 a.m. Brandon makes 911 call, saying he's in a field, bleeding, being chased. 12:36, 12:48 a.m. Brandon places calls to Ledessa, Kyle, and a friend. Most go unanswered. 12:50 a.m. Kyle and Audrey depart to find Brandon. 1:10 a.m. Kyle, Audrey, and the responding deputy arrive at the truck. Brandon's nowhere to be seen. 1:19 a.m. Brandon's phone goes dead. Last known signal ping. Approximately 9 years later. His remains are found less than a mile southeast of the truck location. 9 years. 49 minutes. 1 man. And a mystery as hollow and silent as the dry riverbed that became his grave. The final segment will dig into the aftermath, conspiracy threads, strange recordings, and why, despite finally finding him, the case still feels as cold as ever. In the months that followed the discovery of Brandon Lawson's remains, the Texas wind continued to sweep over the place where he died, a dry, gnarled ravine southeast of Highway 277, shrouded in mesquite and silence. But the wind carried no answers. If anything, the finding of Brandon's body only intensified the mystery. The finality of death should have brought peace. For most families of missing persons, a body means closure, a place to grieve, a cause to accept, a truth to hold. But in this case, the truth had no shape, no detail, no voice. Brandon had died alone in the brush, less than a mile from the people desperately searching for him. And still, after 9 years, no one could say why. The autopsy revealed no fatal trauma. No gunshot, no broken bones, nothing consistent with a violent death, or at least nothing that could survive the ravages of years of exposure and predation. But Kyle didn't buy it, neither did many who'd followed the case. The problem wasn't just that Brandon died. It was that Brandon called for help, and no one ever came. For many, the 911 call remained the most critical clue a distorted recording etched into the minds of thousands. Internet detectives took to forums, YouTube channels, and Reddit threads, deconstructing the audio to a granular level. "There's one car here. Guy's chasing me. Please hurry. I need the cops. They got the first guy." Each sentence sounded like a riddle whispered from the edge of a nightmare. Some amateur analysts ran the call through advanced audio software. They claimed to isolate 3 separate voices. One was clearly Brandon. The others, faint, possibly male, possibly threatening. There were reports of muffled words like, "Stop him," or "He's over there." But these interpretations were subjective, based more on suggestion than science. Still, one detail stood out. Midway through the call, Brandon's tone changed. He went from hurried to almost hushed, as if trying not to be heard. A pause, a whisper, and then, "They got the first guy." Who was the first guy? Was he referring to someone else he'd seen being attacked? Or was it something hallucinated in a drug-fueled panic? Was it code, a warning, a final cryptic breadcrumb? Kyle became obsessed with the phrase. He scoured every lead he could find, trying to identify if anyone else was reported missing in the area around the same time. No one. Not officially. But unofficially, rumors began to spread. Stories of drug runners, cartel lookouts, strange activity in the oilfield outskirts, theories multiplied like flies. And then came the theory that chilled even the most rational minds. The 277 corridor theory. According to online researchers, the stretch of U.S. Route 277, where Brandon vanished, had long been suspected unofficially as a pipeline for drugs and human trafficking. It was a quiet highway with minimal patrol, tucked between San Angelo and Abilene, cutting through counties where local law enforcement lacked the resources to investigate organized activity. Could Brandon have stumbled onto something that night? Was he chased, not because of who he was, but because of what he saw? It was a theory born of desperation, a way to explain the unexplainable, but it had a dark weight to it. Because it meant Brandon's death wasn't an accident. It was silencing. Odessa tried to avoid the noise. For years, she had defended Brandon's character, raised their children, and endured accusations from internet sleuths who scrutinized her every word. After the remains were identified, she withdrew even further. Her grief was private. She didn't do interviews. She stopped replying to messages. Brandon's death wasn't a spectacle to her, it was a wound. But Kyle kept talking, kept searching, kept returning to the scene. He walked the route again and again from the truck to the ravine, retracing Brandon's likely steps. He timed it, measured the terrain, calculated the odds. There were too many things that didn't make sense. Why would Brandon abandon the road and go south? Why not flag down one of the cars that passed? Why scale 3 fences in the dark? And above all, why not come out when Kyle and the deputy arrived? They were there, minutes after the call. Was he hiding? From what? Or from who? Some believe Brandon may have trusted the wrong person that night. Others thought his state of mind had collapsed under the weight of exhaustion, fear, and a lingering paranoia. But if he was mentally compromised, how did he navigate nearly a mile of brutal terrain, injured, in darkness? Still, others clung to the possibility of an accidental death. Perhaps he ran, panicked, fell, and succumbed to exposure. The land can be deadly without a gun or a weapon. The silence can be fatal. But these theories failed to explain the urgency in his voice, the intelligence in the way he called for help. He wasn't hallucinating the danger. He believed it was real, and he died believing it. Brandon's remains were buried in a quiet service attended by family, close friends, and a few loyal searchers who had never stopped walking the land on his behalf. The coffin was small. What was left of him fit in a box no larger than a suitcase. But the weight of his death was massive, and it didn't feel over. That's the strange thing about unsolved cases. Even when you find the body, the story remains buried. Kyle turned to advocacy. He began speaking out about the failures in Brandon's case, the delayed response, the lack of immediate search efforts, the mismanagement of evidence. He wanted to create a system for rural search and rescue efforts, one where no 911 call would ever be dismissed again, where someone like Brandon would be heard before they vanished. Online, the case became symbolic. People wore shirts with Brandon's face. Podcast episodes resurfaced. Crime documentaries included segments on the 911 call. His voice became a warning cry, a plea echoing into future disappearances. I need the cops. But even in death, the story of Brandon Lawson had one final twist. In 2023, a year after the remains were recovered, a man came forward anonymously to a Texas reporter. He claimed he had once lived in Coke County and had information about Brandon's last moments. He refused to be recorded, refused to go on the record. But he said something chilling. You're looking for the wrong story. Brandon wasn't running from strangers. When asked what that meant, the man refused to elaborate. He simply said, sometimes the people chasing you already know your name. Then he hung up. The number was disconnected within hours. Whether it was a hoax, a delusion, or a final breadcrumb of truth, no one could say. But Kyle thought about those words every night. Sometimes the people chasing you already know your name. Today, the scene off Highway 277 looks no different than it did in 2013. The dry earth, the twisting brush, the faded tire marks. Drivers pass by unaware that a man once cried out for help just beyond the guardrail. A man whose voice traveled through a phone line and into the void. The Ford F-150 is long gone. But that field remembers. And so do we. Because Brandon Lawson didn't just vanish. He begged to be found. And we failed him. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share